Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for the next part of my series on Avalon Hill's classic board game Jutland. Now in the previous video I looked at the basic ship-to-ship combat system that governs the the maneuvering and the firing of dreadnoughts, battle cruisers and all the large ships that were involved in this battle and as represented in the game. So now in this one, I'm going to move us up a bit and look at the advanced combat system with a few of the tournament rules thrown in where appropriate, just to illustrate the options that the game gives you. Now, as I said in my previous video, the maneuvering and the formations remain pretty constant, whichever tier of rules you employ. So it's really just the combat that changes. I also need to highlight an intriguing thing I picked up while I was double checking my notes for tonight's video, and it's the ratings on the ships. So looking at Queen Mary and her antagonist Derflinger, in the previous video I pointed out that these gunnery factors, the bow and stern ones, are not used in the basic game. Now in my perusal of the rules, that's right. The basic rules say treat every firing angle as if it's a broadside one. However, the reason I bring this up is because a core concept with the advanced gunnery rules is that they introduce a new system, which I'll look at in a minute, which totally supersedes everything that's printed on the counter. The only thing that remains constant into the advanced rules is the vessel's speed given here. Now, that being the case, and because I can't find any clarification in the rules, I assume that these bow and stern gunnery ratings are tied into the basic game ratings, and they exist for the purpose of players who don't want to go all the way up to the full advanced rules, but who would like to try the tactical combat with bow and stern firing arcs being a factor. Of course, if any of you guys happen to have either edition of this game and know better, if I've missed something critical, please do say in the comments, but that's really the best I can do by way of picking this up. So to illustrate the new rules, I've actually picked on these two helpful ships to basically be my crash test dummies, and it seems appropriate that I pick on poor old Queen Mary and Derflinger for the job. But before I dive into that, let me just explain what all the changes are, because they're quite significant. And as I say, the only piece of information on the ship counters that remains relevant in the advanced game for tactical combat purposes is the ship's speed at the bottom right-hand corner. Everything else is replaced by the British and German hit record sheets. So just to talk you through the geography and what this involves, actually, you know what, I'll go straight to Derflinger because she can help me out here. So these don't need much explanation because obviously vessel type, battle cruiser, Derflinger's her name. This number 12 here is the ship's armor and protection factor, or call it her protection factor. So that's a direct indicator of how much damage she can absorb in battle. And these boxes here represent her armament. So each box represents 1 point of gunnery strength. And these tiny little arrows protruding from the groups show you what bearing the guns can fire on. So collectively, these 6 boxes represent her 2 forward turrets, and these represent her 2 aft turrets. So 6 gunnery factors can fire forward, a total of 12 on either broadside when she's undamaged, and 6 out the rear, which, when you look at the ship counter, is exactly what you'd expect. Anton, Bruno, Caesar, Dora. Wait, no, sorry, my pencil was wobbling. Caesar, Dora. If we look at the British sheet and the equivalent for Queen Mary, you can see that her very different setup is represented. She has about half the overall protection capacity of the Derflinger. And to represent the awkward placement of her midships turret, you've got that block in the center there that can only fire on either beam. So that collectively is her A and B turrets. That's P or Q, depending on who you read, and that's X turret over there. So yeah, very different layout and slightly different on the gunnery factors too. So how does this work in practice? Well, the beauty of having these is, in theory, I wouldn't actually need to have ship counters for a demonstration, but visually it looks a tiny bit wrong to me if you don't. So I am actually going to place Queen Mary and Derflinger just there. Now, from the previous videos, I think you're all pretty familiar with the limitations on my table space. But what I've done to make the demonstration very slightly easier is I've made a little, I basically copied these off the British and German hit records so that I can wave them in front of the camera while I'm talking to you without the confusion of waggling these huge sheets. They also don't catch the light all that helpfully. So for the purposes of this exercise, I'm going to assume that the two crews I've co-opted have arranged things so that their ships are steering parallel courses with no crazy maneuvering. Thank you, guys. And that they're doing it at a fairly constant speed, and that the range is being maintained at 15,000 yards in game terms. Again, thank you very much, fellas. So I'm just going to put that over there. Just come in a bit closer. So the other thing that changes is that the basic gunnery damage table that I showed you in the previous video is now superseded by this rather chunkier effort here. So we're no longer doing odds-based calculations based on an overall gunnery strength. What you do now is you work out your ship's firepower, and then you generate a number of hits with a dice roll. Now, of course, the number of hits you score is modified by the range. So if you're firing at close range, closer ranges, I should say, the number of hits you score could be doubled or tripled. And if you're firing at longer ranges, they could be halved. So let's see what happens in our hypothetical battle. So as with the basic game, the Germans resolved their gunfire first and then the British. So as I say, the range here is 15,000 yards, at which there's no modification to the number of hits. The German ship, as we can see from their record, they have a total of 12 broadside firepower factors. So they are going to roll a dice. I'll give them the red one. And they roll a 2. So consulting the gunnery table, Derflinger's 12 broadside gunnery factors with no modification, a roll of 2 yields 2 hits. Now in the basic game, you cross out these boxes starting left to right. Sorry, did I say the basic game? In the advanced game, you cross these boxes out from left to right, which is fine. But what it does do is that it means that your gunnery damage, your ship's combat capability, is always degraded from the bow moving aft, which can be a tad unrealistic. The tournament rules allow you to change this dynamic. So in the base game, I would just cross off the first 2 boxes. But in the tournament game, you divide the ship into bow and stern by basically halving the number of boxes. So in Queen Mary's case, that would be the halfway point. And you roll a dice. On a 1, 2, 3, it's the bow that starts to lose it. On a 4, 5, 6, it's the stern. Still working from left to right, but it gives you a bit more variety. So let's start off by doing it as the advanced rules have it. So the British cross off 2 boxes. If I was going to shoot back, of course, the logical question is, how do you keep track of, which British guns were knocked out this round, because fire is supposed to be simultaneous. Now you've noticed I've only put a single dash through those boxes. The rules recommend that you do that to show hits that have been sustained this turn, and then once the British have made their counter fire, you then put another line through it to show that that damage has now taken hold. In fact, let's do that now. So Derflinger has landed 2 hits on Queen Mary. Let's give Queen Mary a chance with her 10, still 10 gunnery factors to even the odds a bit. So she gets a 5. So consulting the table, whoops, sorry, mini earthquake there. So she gets a 5, which equates to a single hit back on the Derflinger. Now, because the Germans have already taken their shot, we can just turn that into an X straight away. So on future turns, the Derflinger's forward gunnery factors will only be 5, and her broadside ones will only be 11. Her rearward, sternward gunnery factors will be unaffected by this. So let's just try another shot each, but let's put in the tournament rules version of distributing hits. So Derflinger, slightly weaker now, is going to fire again. Let's assume the range is still about 15,000 yards. So Derflinger fires, and she rolls a 6. Now that's actually very kind of her, because it allows me to talk about another element that is different in both the advanced and the tournament rules. In the advanced rules, if you roll a 6, you roll the dice again. If you're using the optional tournament rules, there is a blood-curdling critical hit table, which, as you can see, can cause all sorts of horridness to the target vessel, up to and including a rather catastrophic magazine explosion. Now, I'll show you the critical hit table, but I'm going to leave that for now because it's really an optional rule. I like it. It adds a lot of realism to the game, but of course it increases the bookkeeping a little bit. But I'm just going to keep this here so you can see the sheer variety of granular damage to the ship can sustain. Engine room hits, gun director hits, jammed steering, the whole works. And if it's of any interest, let's just see what might have happened. So Derflinger rolls a 2, that's engine room damaged. Roll the dice again. That's a 4. Ship must remain stationary for the number of maneuver and fire turns indicated by the die roll, which would have been 4. But I won't keep that. It's just to highlight the existence of the critical hit table for people who do want to use it. So let's assume, however, that we are just playing the advanced rules. So a roll of 6 would require a second roll. I just got a 6 again. Come on, Derflinger, work with me. And because Derflinger's gunnery factors are now down to 11, a roll of 5, which we just got, is a single hit. So is it going to be a forward or aft hit? The Germans get a 4, which means that a line is put through the midships turret, or at least the boxes that represent the midships turret. The British will now get a chance to fire back at a much reduced firepower of 8. Let's see how they do. And they get a 3. That's not too bad, given Queen Mary's slightly battered state. So she scores a 1 hit, that is. And it's a bow hit, so Derflinger's forward armament is suffering again. So that is how the advanced gunnery system works. It's a much better and more realistic way of tracking damage than the rather be-all or end-all combat system that we had with the basic game. Again, I said it last video, I do like the basic game if you want to resolve a massive sea battle very quickly. But if you want something that has slightly more realistic returns, then the advanced rules with selections of the tournament rules bolted on are much, much better. And it's actually much cleverer than it looks on this table, because Losing all your armament boxes does not sink your ship. It's very important to stress that. It's not like the Great War at Sea system where you've got hull boxes as well, and once they're all crossed off, then you go under. It is possible in this game for a ship to lose all its armament and still continue moving and fighting. There's two ways in which a ship can be sunk using the advanced rules. One is if they're very unlucky or they've been ganged up on by a large number of enemy vessels. If they score a number of hits in a single turn equal to or greater than their protective factor, then they sink. That's assumed to have inflicted catastrophic damage. The other way they can sink, and this is the slower and surer way, let's say the battle goes really against the Queen Mary, and rather than catastrophically blowing up as she did historically, she's lost all of her armament boxes. When that happens, you begin taking flotation hits. And once you've lost all your armament boxes, any flotation hits you take become permanent. So you just mark somewhere in the vicinity of the ship's damage sheet, control sheet, these hits as they come in. Once you have a number of hits accumulated that's equal to your protection factor, then you sink. Another effect that flotation hits have is that every one you suffer reduces your speed by 1. So let's say poor Queen Mary had been terribly, terribly battered, lost all her armament and taken 3 flotation hits. Her speed by that point, and I would have noted it down on her sheet, would have been reduced to 9. And you just keep track of this until finally, if she's very unlucky, the inevitable happens and the 6th hit is landed, then the ship's a goner. Unless, of course, if you are bolting on those marvellous, marvellous tournament level rules, something really bad happens to her before then. Now, just to talk about the effect that range has, there's another departure from the basic game. That, as you can see from the range ruler, gunnery factors can be doubled, tripled, or even halved at very long ranges. Now, in the basic game, it is the gunnery factors that are affected that way. In the advanced game, it's the number of hits you score that are either doubled, tripled, or halved, depending upon the range. So that's one to pay attention to, because I don't know about the rest of you guys, this is probably just me. I find that sort of mental gear change a little bit taxing, and I do often forget. So yes, but overall, I'd say this is a much better system. The other good thing that the advanced rules do is they introduce us to light cruisers and destroyer flotillas. Now, these add a huge tactical dimension to the game because while they're not very powerful, the guns on destroyer flotillas and light cruisers simply cannot harm dreadnoughts in this game. Don't even bother. There are a couple of other oddities in that light cruisers, despite the fact that they did carry torpedoes in the battle, they do not have any capacity for making torpedo attacks in this game. Only destroyers can do that. Now, whether that's a ruling just because light cruisers are not perceived as being able to make meaningful torpedo attacks on dreadnoughts, I'm not too sure. But that's how it is anyway. And as you can probably gather from the fact that the flotillas and the light cruiser squadrons have these boxes, like their larger brethren, they can be crossed off as well from direct hits. And they function in very much the same manner, except that these numbers in the boxes represent their collective gunnery factors. So let's say hits are scored on Light Cruiser Squadron 2. The removal of those boxes implies the loss or serious damage to particular cruisers, reducing the overall squadron's gun power. So these are represented with their own counters. I won't take them out the bag, but you can see the destroyer flotillas there. And for the purposes of measuring ranges, because obviously, unlike the dreadnoughts, which have clearly defined 4 funnels, most of the time that you can aim from. You aim using the ship's speed rating as your aiming point. So it's quite a nice, elegant way of factoring them in. There's also rules for the German ones being able to lay smoke screens, which is rather handy. And lastly, when it comes to torpedo attacks, there are some rather detailed rules governing how this happens. So that's the torpedo attack table. And as with gunnery in the advanced game, you can either roll the dice again or incorporate the flotation critical hit optional rules, which are specified in the at the end of the rule book if you really want to go all in with the rules options you have. It is worth it, although there's a lot more bookkeeping, but again, you get some brilliant variety. And the torpedo attack table covers both attacks by destroyers and also by U-boats if the Germans are using their optional U-boat deployments. In fact, there's even, for moments when U-boats have a chance to attack capital ships outside the context of a tactical battle, because you can ambush British ships when they're on the strategic map. There's this whole matrix here that gives you results based on player decisions. So the British player can alter course defensively, go full speed ahead. The German counters with a secret decision, and then you compare them and then you see what the overall effect is. It's really good. It's quite an engaging and very straightforward way of addressing a type of attack which the British should worry about if you're playing a historical game. But it also keeps it simple so that you don't have to overburden yourself with the details. Some games would probably devote pages of rules to covering that very topic. So there we go. That in a very brief nutshell is the advanced combat system and how it differs from the basic gunnery combat system. And as I say, I like both, but I think the advanced rules plus some selected bolt-ons from the tournament rules are the way to go if you just want that little bit more realism as to how these ships behave and how they react when they take damage. It's very neatly done, I think. So I hope that was of use and or interest, hopefully both. And in the next video, I'm going to be looking at the solitaire option for this game, because believe it or not, there is actually a solitaire option for this game. It's not the most complete, but the fact that Mr. Dunnigan even attempted to put one in, I find very impressive. So we will be covering that next. But in the meantime, I just want to say a very huge thank you to you for watching this video. Please do keep the comments coming, questions, queries, or even if you see something where I've slipped up. I always appreciate the corrections because it's so easy to miss things when you're trying to do this. But as I say, whoever you are, wherever you're watching from, your company is much appreciated. Really enjoy having you guys on board for these things, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.